Um, Hi, good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to this session that all of you have been waiting for. We have here with us Mr. Piyush Goyal, who's the National Treasurer of BJP. He is also the member of Upper House of the Parliament and heads the Information Communication and the Poll Campaign Committee for the BJP. Mr. Piyush Goyal, who has been, in the political side of the arena right since his childhood, also holds a CA degree and a law degree as well, and has been an investment banker himself. So over the next half an hour or so, he's going to be talking about BJP government's the next economic and the policy agenda, something that all of you have been asking about all this week and even earlier. So without wasting too much of time, I'll just hand over the mic over to Piyush.
I'll go there.
Yeah.
A very good morning to all of you. Thank you very much, Mahesh. I just had the privilege of meeting Mr. Christopher Wood. And earlier in the morning when I was talking to your colleagues, I was just mentioning I hope he has a safe flight back home after all his comments here. Because I don't think the government is very happy about what they claim is comments about Indian politics, which I believe is a little uncharitable because clearly what's evident all across the nation today, and I'm sure all of you are not very much out of tune with the reality in the nation, that 2014 is going to be a very important election. We are facing tumultuous times in terms of the economy, in terms of the politics in the nation today. And we see going forward, as CLSA has also rightly predicted, I'm not talking about the numbers because numbers can be misleading. And in fact, I was complaining about the numbers that they have projected. I'm not happy at all to hear that I'm only going to get 202 seats. I'm pitching for much more. But we can clearly see 2014 as a referendum on leadership. The nation today stands at the cusp of probably one of the most fiercest battles Indian elections have ever seen. It's going to be a battle where development and leadership hopefully will be the main focus. We may have a few sideshows. We may have a little bit of politics around the elections, which inevitably happens in every country. I don't think India is any exception in that. But clearly, the agenda for the election, as my party sees it, the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is in opposition today, is that this is an election where an aspirational young India is going to be talking about development, is concerned about their future, is exposed to what could be a better life, better quality of life, what they see all over the world, and hopefully will come out in large numbers to express satisfaction or unhappiness, as the case may be. In different elections, we have 5 states going to the polls as we speak. And about 4 or 5 months later, we'll be going into the national election. Couple of important things that I'll just put in perspective as India stands today. I just mentioned about the aspirational middle class. That aspiration comes about because of a huge spread of first television, then the mobiles, and now internet. Now, these are 3 distinguishing features of this election over any other election fought in India in the past. So we almost have a situation where 70% of India, and one would say about 85, 90% of urban India and probably about 65% of rural India is today exposed to television. So we have a huge amount of exposure to the world, exposure to current issues, news, breaking news. What could have happened better? And that's where the aspiration really drives from. Of course, mobiles with about 700 odd million phones in the hands of, again, largely adult India is a very redeeming feature. So if we have a population of 1.2 billion and we have 700 million phones, and if we look at the fact that we have about 16 million people added every year, so we clearly have a population of about 300 million, 320 million, which is not voting. So amongst the voting population, we have a mobile penetration of nearly 75%. And that's a huge number. And with video on mobile, we have all these new apps, we have WhatsApp and whatnot all over the place. And largely mobile phones today are at least feature phones. So you do get some sort of messaging which is going beyond the text messages. So we are able to communicate a lot of messages. I think that's one distinguishing feature of this election which will set the trend for the results going forward. Of course, there is a lot of anti-incumbency in terms of jobs, in terms of growth, in terms of lifestyles, in terms of corruption, in terms of inflation, galloping inflation in the last few years. And all of that has led to a reasonable feeling amongst even investors. And we see that happening in terms of the stock market rising relentlessly in the last few days, that there could be a change in the offing, a change which is probably a little more pro-business than the current dispensation. And just last week, we had the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, speaking to a forum in Delhi. And I asked him about the rise of conservatism. Large parts of Europe, we had Australia, you saw Angela Merkel getting re-elected. Japan is talking Abenomics now and talking more progressive right-of-the-center policies. Australia has seen a more progressive or a rightist government, center of the right government. I asked him this question, and I really enjoyed listening to his answer. I think he set the perspective right when he mentioned that the crisis of 2008-9 has taught us some very important lessons, one of which principally is that when the times are good, it's important to bring in fiscal prudence, it's important to save when the sun is shining, it's important to set your house in order, get financial sector reforms in place. I think that's where we really lost the plot. What I had seen as a great opportunity for India post the crisis, financial crisis, largely in the Western world, was an opportunity to really overtake even our past growth in terms of providing to the world new manufacturing bases, providing to the world technology or technology-enabled labor, knowledge-skilled workers. We had a great opportunity in that period to help set our house in order. A lot of the baggage that we still have in India could have been set in order. Unfortunately, we have frittered away some of the advantages, as I'll mention a little later. But clearly, the referendum now is going to be on the performance of government, performance of governments in the states. More and more, India now lives in the states. And I think people have closely watched what kind of government they have got, even in the states. And in that respect, Gujarat certainly stands out as a role model state in terms of its economic performance, its performance on several social indicators, even though many leaders from the other side have tried to allege that Gujarat hasn't done well on the social indicators, but I can talk a lot more about that if you have any questions on it. But in all respects, I think this election seems to me to be veering towards a wave election, an election which will give a decisive government to India, one way or the other, and I'm clearly hoping that it's our way. And I see in this election no uncertainty in the people's voice. It will be a clear mandate. It will be a mandate for change. And it will be a mandate which will lead India into a much brighter future. And I can assure you, investors, you don't have to worry. It's the right time. I tell a lot of my friends, this is the time to buy India. I mean, you can't get it better. This is the time when there is enough opportunity in India. And I see a great future ahead going forward. Just a little bit of the historical perspective before I get down to my agenda. You know, we've had the good, bad, and the ugly, a mix of all of three in the last 6 decades since independence. We had the pain of partition in 47, we had riots, we had to integrate the whole of India with all the 300-odd princely states. So the initial years had a few problems, but at the same time threw up a very, very beautiful constitution. A constitution which today is tried and tested. We have the arms of government, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. And that interplay that we see between these three really is the defining moment of Indian democracy. That's what keeps our country united, keeps our country completely as one in the event of any crisis. And I must say, to visualize situations 60-odd years ago, which exist even today, and bring out a constitution which addresses many of the nation's problems, was a tremendous task that Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar did 60 years ago. Well, early periods after independence were periods where we had a command and control economy, the socialist pattern, more on the Russian pattern of growth. But the first few years really did not do India proud in terms of economic progress. So if you see the 1950 to 1990 period as a 40-year period, India's per capita income grew. The GDP growth per capita was only 1.8%. And if you compress that to a smaller period between 1960 and 80, so we had a little rush of growth soon after independence, when we had these large steel plants and large mining plants coming up, which saw some sort of growth. Then we had a 60 to 82 decades of per capita growth of 1.1%. It was as bad as that. So we've lost a good amount of time in these 4 decades where India could have possibly done much better. But that's history. We had 3 wars in 62, 65, 1971. We had problems with high taxes. We had a problem of the emergency where again, the judiciary came out in good light, that India has a robust judicial system and it could even take on the establishment right at the top. But we faced 2 years of uncertainty, political uncertainty in terms of internal emergency. We had, I think at that point of time, reached a situation where India could have gone down the tube. I mean, we could have lost this power of democracy were it not for the clarity of the Indian people that in 1977 they restored democracy and brought back a duly elected government, deposing a government in power which had complete control, which had control on the government machinery, on funds. Despite a short 30, 40-day election campaign, the government of India was toppled, the Prime Minister herself lost an election, and we had a new government. Why I say this, to bring the historical perspective to current day relevance, in 1977, the only means of communication was the radio, and radio penetration was very small. The other alternate media was newspapers, and news would take days to travel. The older people who have come to India in those days would recollect, a telephone call was impossible to make in India in the 70s. Despite that, in a short 30-day election campaign, you saw the whole of North India, which was largely affected by the emergency, vote as one, and a complete sweep of anti-incumbency. So we are talking of an age where communication was difficult, yet people knew what was good for India. And I have tried to analyze elections ever since then. elections in India, save and except for a very short period between 1989 to 1998, we had a very short period where we saw 7 prime ministers. Other than that, India has voted decisively. Whether it was in 77 to overthrow the emergency, whether it was in 1980, within 2 years of bringing the Janata Party into power, 2.5 years, you saw that government being thrown out because people were fed up with the internal fights within the government, the Janata Party government, which was not even a coalition actually. It was a party which had merged 4 parties. And they threw them out within 2.5 years, forgave Mrs. Gandhi all her excesses of the emergency and brought her back in with a decisive majority again. Then we had the elections in 1984, which of course was largely driven around sympathy. So maybe a little bit of an aberration there, but we had a decisive mandate. 1989 was again a vote for change when they wanted to get rid of a government which was alleged to have been involved in some corruption. Again, the vote of change gave us a government. But that's that period, 89 to 98, where we saw governments come and go, and the coalition era in India started. But again, post-99, we've had a government, three elections, each one throwing up a government which has lasted its full term. So I'm quite confident that the people of India know what is best for them. They have the wisdom to understand that India cannot live in uncertainty. And I personally believe the elections will veer towards a powerful central government with a majority which will take the country out of the current mess that we are in. At this stage, I'll just like to mention 2 important factors before I come to the agenda. One is, if you see the reform process in India, you saw a large amount of reform in the initial flush of reform, the 91 to 94, 95 period. Post that, the then government got into a little bit of a political problem, and they could see that they were not doing too well on the opinion polls, and they almost stopped reform. So from 95 to 99 almost, there was hardly any reform in India. It was the 2000 to 2004 period, which in my opinion, I'm not trying to bring in politics, but even dispassionately, if you were to assess the amount of reform that happened in different periods, I think that's the period where you saw banking, finance, and insurance opening up for the private sector and foreign investment. That's the period you saw loss-making public sector undertakings being disinvested. And today, you can see evidence of their success stories in terms of the success of, let's say, the hotels which were disinvested, the Hindustan Zinc, Bharat Aluminium, the Vedanta Group, who got a number of assets, the Tatas got a number of assets. So a lot of loss-making units were disinvested. The few which could not be disinvested are still making losses, unfortunately. You saw aviation opening up to the private sector. You saw the IT industry really kicking off from 99 onwards. Telecom was one of the major success stories with the new telecom policy in 99, which gave wings to the telecom industry. And you saw the massive infrastructure build-out during that period, the likes of which India had never seen before. So you saw the huge highway and roadway program, you saw the rural connectivity program, you saw ports coming up in the private sector like never before. You saw the electricity reform in 2003, which was the beginning of private producers in the electricity sector. So I think it's important to see in context where and how true reform in India started. Unfortunately, in 2004, Mr. Vajpayee lost power. We had a new government which was dependent on support from the left. So again, 2004 to 2008 was a period very little reform happened. I mean, we are often being questioned about our credentials on reform. But if you were to analyze the reforms of the last 10 years, between 2004 to 8, till the nuclear deal and the left front withdrew support, we saw no reform. They did try to introduce some little bit of reform in 8, but then we had elections in 9, so not much happened in that period. So UPA 1 almost reaped the benefit of whatever the NDA, Mr. Vajpayee, had sowed in his tenure. And on the back of that was able to enjoy a few years of very high growth, but largely consumption-led growth. It was not a job-creating growth which we had seen in the NDA. So if you look at jobs, in the 5 years, 2000 to 2005, India created 60 million jobs. But in the 2005 to 10 period, only 27 million jobs, no, 2.7 million jobs were created. I'm sorry, 2.7 million jobs were created. 60 in 5 years and 2.7 in the next 5 years. It's not my data, it's not political, it's from the Planning Commission sites, so you can all verify that. Again, in 2009, when this government got re-elected, they had the support of the Trinamool Congress, which again held back reforms. So again, 2009 to 2012 almost, you saw a period of very little happening on the reform front. It is only post-12 when the Trinamool Congress withdrew that we now see some reform in the current system, which we heartily welcome, save and except one or two issues. But unfortunately, the climate got vitiated with a lot of corruption scandals tumbling out of the closet. We saw vote bank and entitlement politics going beyond reasonable limits. So we have a situation today where we have almost institutionalized poverty. Instead of fighting to get out of poverty, we see large sections of society wanting to be included under the poverty line, which is a very unfortunate development. I personally feel very perturbed, very disturbed about that, and would have loved to see a resurgent India where all of us were trying to get out of our mess, not trying to bother about the entitlements we lose if we get out of the mess. So this is the perspective in which I think today's election is being held. This is where India stands today. And going forward another 4 months, we will see a new government. Whatever may be the color and shape of that government, it will clearly have to address these issues. A new government has an advantage of a lot of the baggage going past them. And if you ask me, what are the 2 or 3 important issues that any new government has to address up front as soon as they come into power, I would bracket them as follows. The first priority will be to restore the investor confidence. And I don't mean only the foreign investors. I personally believe it's equally important to restore the Indian domestic investment climate. Bring in confidence. Assure people there won't be policy flip-flop. A policy of the government once enacted stands. You can change policy, mind you. I'm not suggesting that a policy is permanent, but any prospective change where an investor comes in with his eyes wide open is fine. What bothers, I think, investors is retroactive amendments, not only in tax laws, but in several laws. So I think India, in a way, the decline of investor confidence started when the tax laws were amended for the special economic zones in 2012 budget, where we saw 2011 budget for the year 11-12, when we saw the SEZs, which were promised by the government, tax incentives in terms of minimum alternate tax and dividend distribution tax being exempt. Both of those were introduced on SEZs. And I think that's where the policy decline in India started. Of course, the retroactive amendments to tax laws, which popularly is called the Vodafone tax, I think was the last straw on the camel's back, and I don't think India has been able to overcome that till today. It's something any new government will have to promise investors that in future there will be no retroactive taxation, no policy flip-flop. We'll have to give a government of integrity so that should you invest in a company based on the back of an audit report of probably one of the top 4 companies or a legal due diligence from one of the top international or national law firms, one should be able to trust that report and not be fearsome that a license can be cancelled by the courts, or allotments of resources or allotment of any government license or government resource or government asset in judicial scrutiny can be struck down. I think that's the type of confidence that investors are looking for. And I think the first agenda that any government led by my party and Mr. Narendra Modi would be to restore that investor confidence. Of course, it also calls for decisive leadership, something which Mr. Modi is very well known for. He's also well known for managing truly like a business executive. I mean, I have interacted with a lot of business persons, and if you come across any of them who've worked in Gujarat, you will find two distinctive features of his government have been integrity and a hands-off policy. He believes in management by exception, whether it's in dealing with his bureaucrats, whether it's in dealing with business, whether it's in dealing with the people of his state. I think his effort has been to try and let processes prevail, reduce discretionary powers, and let the people run their businesses in an independent fashion, let free enterprise or entrepreneurial spirit prevail, and not be bogged down into bureaucratic tangles. One other thing I would like to mention on record is that my government does not believe in a witch hunt. We are not looking at trying to settle scores. We are not looking at trying to get even for all the trial and tribulation that my Prime Minister candidate has had to face, both nationally and internationally, because of some misguided notions, or, as I often put it to some of the diplomatic friends who've now started making a beeline to come and meet me. I have 2 meetings later in the day today also. And since many of you come from countries who have in the past almost vilified Mr. Modi, what we do feel pained about is the fact that in a country, in a democracy which is fiercely independent, where the rule of law prevails, where we have a powerful judiciary which takes care of the interests of the people and the nation, it does bother us that some foreign nations chose fit to pass judgment or to take a call on what was right or wrong without getting into the merit of the whole situation. And a lot of nations have, of course, rectified that situation. But the fact is that we in India are fiercely independent. We are going to remain fiercely independent, and certainly do not believe that our Indian processes need to be questioned by any foreign nation. Of course, the current government is even questioning reports written out by investment bankers or by investment advisors as interference in Indian politics and Indian policy. So if that can be interference, then other issues where the foreign nations interfered is certainly far more objectionable. But I repeat, we are not looking at a witch hunt. We are looking at an atmosphere of mutual confidence, an atmosphere where we want to take all sections of society together, an atmosphere where we do not believe divisive politics works. We believe we'll have to look at inclusive politics. We'll have to include all sections of society and develop the nation for all. And that, I think, will be the ground rule on which Mr. Modi will run his government. A few design principles on which our policies are going to stand. I think the first and most important thing that Modi ji has been propagating and particularly implementing in his state of Gujarat, and some of you often ask us whether his policies of Gujarat are replicable in the rest of India. I certainly believe they are. After all, Gujarat has the same bureaucracy that is there in the rest of India. Gujarat has the same people of Indian origin that are there in the rest of India. Gujarat had the same problems. I mean, a lot of people try to project Gujarat was always very progressive. Before Mr. Modi came in, the last 5 years, the growth was 4%. And under his leadership, we've seen growth go up to double digit. CAGR over 10 years. No state in India of that size has given a decade of double-digit growth CAGR any time in India's independent history. And one of the principles on which he ran his government was minimum government and maximum governance. He believes it's not the job of government to be running businesses. It's the job of government to facilitate entrepreneurship, to enable businesses to flourish, not interfere into day-to-day processes of running your companies, but regulate that the people are not taken for a ride. So I think government's job should be more regulation to ensure that processes are well maintained, processes are followed, rules and guidelines are not flouted, but certainly not interfere right into small things like it was erstwhile. You know, you had boiler inspectors coming to inspect your boilers every few months. You had lift inspectors coming to check your lifts. And I'm giving you small day-to-day examples, but in all processes, he's tried to make it simple, tried to bring e-governance into his state, and I think that can be duplicated very easily in the rest of India. Another thing he has focused on is outputs and outcomes. I think India has for far too long looked at budgets, looked at government spending, looked at everything from the perspective of inputs. So we feel very proud we spent $8 billion in an employment guarantee program. But we just don't bother about what did we get out of that. Was it only a dole, or did we really create infrastructure or assets? I think the outcomes over the years have got diluted, and the inputs have been the main area of focus. So, I mean, I was recollecting Milton Friedman saying in one of his early writings, one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. And I think that's where Mr. Modi scored. He looks at a project, he asks the pertinent questions, he allocates a responsibility, and then it's hands off. Get it done. These are the timelines. This is the cost. This is the budget. Very serious concerns if the budget overshoots or the time overshoots, unlike many other projects in India which have consistently over the years seen time and cost overruns. And he actually understands the economic value of this overrun in time or cost. In the opportunity lost, the time lost, the benefit lost. And that has, I think, that's been one of his advantages to take his growth or fast-track his growth. And I tell you, one day we had a chief minister's conference of the party when each chief minister presented his case to the leadership. And at the end of it, I asked Mr. Modi, now you've achieved 11% at that time, 11% growth. What's the next level? I mean, when can we see 15% growth in your state? And his comment was very interesting. He said, I would love to do it. I have the resources to do it. Money is not a constraint. My problem is execution. I'm not able to get execution on the ground to achieve a 15% growth, which obviously shows you the opportunity for all of you, ladies and gentlemen here, in terms of bringing to India the execution ability, the technology to make execution happen. Obviously, the capital to make it happen also in the private sector, while government does have adequate resources if run honestly. Another thing that he very seriously believes in is his 3S formula, the speed, skill, and scale. I think one thing he has taught the nation is to think big. Unfortunately, we get bogged down in our own inability to visualize big outcomes. The visionary leadership that India really craves for has been missing for some time. In that respect, when he plans a project, I have seen him look at things, the big picture and the big outcome. He brings scale to whatever he thinks. He sees speed. He doesn't like somebody coming to him with a project and say, okay, this is my 20-year vision. How can we bring the project down to a 5-year vision? How can we bring it down to outcomes within the next 2 years? I think speed is the essence of any fast tracking of India's economic growth, something which the nation requires very seriously. And just the other day, 2 days back, in a public meeting, he was talking about skill. India needs to skill 500 million people. We have had a problem of low quality of education. We rank some 72nd or 73rd in the PISA rankings where they come up with quality parameters. Of course, we found a solution for that also. We stopped participating in the PISA ratings. But I think the important message was lost. Unfortunately, we like to shoot the messenger rather than learning from the message, message intended to be taught. But I think what Mr. Modi brings is a serious commitment to skilling. And his commitment is so deep that he actually had a bunch of young boys and girls sit down and map out how many skills a person requires from womb to tomb, from the womb of a mother till he is dead and in the tomb. And we require 5,000 skills in India through the lifespan of an individual. And he's embarked on a massive program in his state. I think we as a nation will have to really look at large outcomes in terms of skill development. I have some thoughts on that, but I think for paucity of time, I won't get into detail. But just like China today is talking of a 10-year program to skill the 500 million people that they need to skill, whether it's in English proficiency, whether it's in actual vocational training, I think India will have to embark on a similar program. Unfortunately, we have a situation where we are barely talking of 1 million or 2 million people to be skilled each year in terms of government outlays. At best, the targets are 10 million a year. I don't think India has the luxury of time to skill our population over 50 years. Just not possible. We'll have to embark on a massive skill development program. I have some thoughts. I'm, in fact, writing a narrative on what my thoughts are. It's a personal narrative, which I hope to be out in a couple of months, where I'll elaborate on this. But I think that will be one of the bulwark of Mr. Modi's programs: speed, skill, and scale. Of course, the bottom line for business is that we'll have to move out of entitlements and move into empowering our people with jobs. So another major focus will be every program will be focused on jobs, creating new jobs. Unfortunately, with the infrastructure sector falling out in terms of the last 3 or 4 years, in terms of construction and real estate not prospering in the last few years, India has lost jobs. We have lost a lot of good jobs. Of course, the law enforcement agencies aren't doing any better. The way they've come down with a ton of bricks with transfer pricing orders, ridiculous orders in some of the best companies, best-run companies in India. I am actually very worried. I was telling Mr. Modi the other day, we can set everything else right, but how will we set right all the mess that we are going to be inherited with should we come to power? I mean, the Supreme Court cases, the tax demands. The other day we had the income tax presenting to my committee in Parliament, and they said we have $3 billion in demands with blah, 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 these companies. What have you recovered? $6 million. $3 billion in demands, you've recovered $6 million? Yeah, the rest is in litigation. And I'm a chartered accountant, I can assure you, at the end of it, we're going to lose all of that from the government. I mean, some ridiculous orders on, to take a small example, I'm told there's no press over here, but I could say it in press also. I've said it on television often enough. In a ridiculous situation where Microsoft is being targeted to say that, you know, some part of the development of Windows 8, is it, that happened in India. So you should be taxed on the worldwide profits of Windows 8. Part of it was developed in India, so let's tax part of it in India. Ridiculous. I said it on the floor of the House. What does the government want to do? Get Shell to leave India, get Microsoft, get Nokia, get IBM to leave India? I mean, you're professing you want to attract FDI. And on the other hand, you've let your tax revenue officials loose on companies. So I think we will have to set right this mess. We'll have to have more transparency in the tax laws. And I think government will also have to stop litigating as much as it does. We have a few ideas in terms of healthcare and education. Certainly the quality of education needs to be addressed. healthcare will have to move more and more into preventive healthcare. That's, I think, the crying need of India. So the other day, a study I was reading showed the quality of water is such a big concern that some 60% of stomach-related diseases, which is the largest problem in India, is due to the poor quality of water. And I've actually run a program, thought of an idea, by which in less than a capex of $4 billion and an OPEX annually of $2 billion, we can provide good quality processed water to all the poor people in the nation by going through a process of small kiosks in each of the villages or small slum centers in the country. So there are a lot of things that can be done. Focus will have to be on preventive healthcare rather than on curative or palliative healthcare. And I think we can actually, within budgetary constraints, really improve the quality of healthcare here. We've had issues in manufacturing where, again, I have a certain set of ideas focused around the plug-and-play system. I believe one big problem in projects in India has been the fact that entrepreneurs are expected to go around and get a plethora of licenses. I mean, I myself, as an entrepreneur, started a small-scale industry 25 years ago. And I've seen the pain and tribulation, and I think it's no less today in terms of the number of approvals, the number of licenses, the number of government offices that a person has to interact and contend with. I think we will have to look at alternate processes which can be more technology-driven. We'll have to look at government playing the role of aggregating all these permissions and then auctioning through a transparent process the project to the highest bidder. So, for example, a power plant. Should the government not provide the license, provide a power purchase agreement, give a mining lease and a coal mine lease, get the environment cleared, get the land in order, and then auction the project? The banker will be very happy to invest. I think all of you would love to invest in a project which through a transparent mechanism has been auctioned along with all these other approvals. So the guys can get down to doing financial closure in 3 or 4 months and implement the project and not take 6 years to get a mining lease cleared or 4 years to get an environment license and years to get land. I think there are new ideas, there are new things that can be done. We are committed to doing that. I mean, when Nano was thrown out of West Bengal, Mr. Modi actually only sent an SMS, a text message to Mr. Ratan Tata inviting him to Gandhinagar. And when he came there, he had all approvals in place. He had land given to him in less than a week. And I think it's probably one of the fastest implemented auto project in the country. The different reasons why they're not doing too well today, but certainly not Mr. Modi's fault. Housing is one other area which I think my government will really focus on. India has multiple problems which revolve around lack of good housing for the poor. What for the poor? For about 85% of India. I mean, it's so prohibitively expensive to own a house, and with interest rates so high, I think today even the middle class can't own a house. It actually reminds me of Mr. Vajpayee's era when businesses were getting loans at 7% and home loans were available at 6%, and inflation was down to 4%. And that's the type of government the NDA had given in its earlier stretch. Probably a little more focus on conveying that message and in outcomes to reach the poor rather than waiting for the trickle-down effect. If we were to pull up people out of poverty with good jobs, with good houses, I certainly see a very bright future for India going forward. And I'm convinced a decade of double-digit growth is in the waiting for India. I see a strong, decisive, visionary and honest leadership taking reign in Delhi with an absolute majority, which is why I disagree with Mr. Wood's or the CLSA's assessment of 202 seats. I think the people of India will give us a more decisive majority. And I'll just end with the few lines from Margaret Thatcher. Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.